environments and contexts and forums in which these kinds of conversations take place and in which this information can be found. So it is out there in the world, I think. And my sense, my optimistic, perhaps naive sense, is that the general direction of travel is forward, and it's comprehensive and it's engaged, and we are mindful that there are things that we did not know that perhaps we ought to be engaged with. But we're also at a bit of an inflection point where the politics around knowing our history better have become weaponized by certain political parties and certain political actors. So we need to be absolutely vigilant that we don't fall back into a fictitious New Zealand in which people could quite happily stand up and say, well, we have the greatest race relations in the world and colonisation was manifestly a good thing for Māori. I mean, that takes a spectacular degree of arrogance and ignorance to assert. There are people who will assert that in the public domain today who clearly haven't been near a history book ever. And we need to be mindful of that. But you referred to earlier people, and there's a school over the road there where my kids went 20 odd years ago. They're out there this morning having kapahaka practice, and there's a bunch of Māori kids there, and there are some Fijian kids, and there are Pākehā kids, and there's all sorts of kids doing there. So this stuff is becoming more prominent, and in fact, the very fact of that, I think, is what explains the pushback at the current moment in time from the current administration. There wouldn't be this pushback had there not been progress to push back against.
So you encounter anger on more than one side of this debate, which you write about. Also, the power of ignorance, people choosing not to know or not wanting to know. How do you respond to people who get in touch with you and say, look, we need to put this behind us. We need to look to the future. We need to move on.
Well, at one level, at one level we do. We are constantly moving into the future, but we can choose how we move into the future. We can move into the future in continued ignorance, or we can move into the future embracing the full knowledge of what has occurred here, who has won, who has lost, where the advantages have lain, what can be done to address those things, so on and so forth. So there are various ways in which we could do that. The moving into the future by pretending that none of this stuff ever happened, that's a loser's strategy, because this stuff won't go away. It doesn't go away. It's right behind you, even if you pretend that it's not there and that it never happened and that everything that occurred in this place post-contact was pristine and in the best interests of everybody, which is historically ludicrous. But you can maintain that. It takes quite a lot of effort, and you've got to keep on stoking the fires of outrage whenever anybody questions your origin story or your creation myth. But the past will follow you. It's everywhere. It's all around you. It's in the street signs. It's in the configuration of our sections. It's in our cadastral maps. It's all over the place. You won't ever outrun it, and it will find you at some point. I think it makes way more sense just to stop and engage with it. You don't have to worry about being held personally responsible. No sensible person does that, although you will quite often be attacked by people who say, well, I wasn't there and I'm not personally responsible. You're kind of completely missing the point here. No one is saying that anybody alive today is personally responsible for anything other than perhaps taking responsibility for being honest, first and foremost, with yourself, and then maybe with other people around you. So the moving on story is one of the tactics of selective historical amnesia. There are some things that we are dead keen to move on from. To take one example, the fact that until 1975, what we now call general constituency seats at the election that we are going to have on the 7th of November were called European seats because Māori people couldn't enrol to vote in those seats. So we can move on from that stuff. But there are other things that we don't want to move on from. We don't ever want to move on from Anzac Day. Imagine that. Imagine suggesting to anybody out there in the world today that we should just move on from Anzac and forget it. So we are a little bit selective, I think, in the things that we want to move on from. And maybe that's something we ought to reflect on.
Why are people so happy to move on, do you think? What are we frightened of?
There are absolutely some people I have had exchanges with, short, quite terse exchanges with, who are frightened that the things that they have will be taken from them. It's not clear to me who is doing the taking. I don't know what that project is, so I think that's an imaginary fear. I think somewhere beneath all of that, there is possibly a deeper fear that the the imaginary nation that many of us, and I absolutely count myself amongst this group, many of us construct in our heads about New Zealand, that it will shatter and break, that we will need to put something together again. So there is something around our creation myths, particularly, I think, but not exclusively for Pākehā, which which is really troubled by the suggestion that they are anything other than the imaginary version that we have in our heads. It's quite difficult when you start inviting people or offering people a form of words. And I am, I'm obviously not, lots of people do this kind of work, and I'm late to the party. But when you offer people a form of words that requires them to interrogate their own understandings of themselves, their families, their place in this country, and the country in which they stand, that's a really challenging thing to do. I don't think I would absolutely not, in no circumstances, accuse people of being anything really when they're going through that emotional process of just thinking, okay, I grew up for 15, 20, 30, 40 years thinking this thing about the country, and now I need to rework that. So that's a fearful thing to do, because our whole way of making sense of ourselves and the nation that we are in and a part of is challenged. That's really hard work, I think.
Richard Shaw, really interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time this morning on 9 to Noon. Richard's new book is The Good Settler, Essays from Other People's Lands. We're talking bagels on the other side of the news headlines. It's 28 minutes to 11. Let's hear the very latest. Evie Ashton, kia ora, good morning.
Kia ora. There's been an escalation in clashes in the Strait of Hormuz, with the US saying it's hit sites responsible for attacking 3 American destroyers. Iran says, however, the US violated a ceasefire by targeting an Iranian oil tanker and another ship. The Transport Agency is urging people to take extra care on State Highway 6 between Makarora in Otago and Haast on the west coast because of flooding. And the University of Auckland's online learning system has been hijacked by what it says is a malicious actor. The breach could include names, email addresses, student ID numbers and messages between users.
Good to see you all. Am I close enough to the mics? Okay. Yep. All good. All right. Who wants to kick off?
Steve, first of all, congratulations.
Thank
How
you.
did yesterday go? And I think you found out the day before, didn't you?
I did. So it was a whirlwind 24 hours. Kind of felt like a surprise announcement to me, almost at the AGM as well as the rest of the room. But thankfully, it wasn't mute silence when it was announced. There was some applause, so I was pleased about that.
Obviously, it was a long process since Robbo sort of resigned. At what stage did you think that you wanted to take the CEO job? Like, how did that process play out?
Yeah, look, I always had confidence in my own ability, and so I had a really big opportunity being asked to take on the interim role. I didn't think, beyond a week-to-week approach to that, really. I was, and I drew a lot on my time as a player, right, which is you turn up every Monday and you do the best job you can for that week, and you just keep turning up and let the results take care of themselves. So thankfully, things have played out pretty well.
Just on the results, I guess, where is NZR at right now? Where, does cost saving need to happen?
Look, we're in a pretty good space. I mean, you would have seen yesterday's results. We reported a small operating break-even, so we're really proud of that, because that reflects that in terms of our day-to-day operations, we are living within our means, and that includes funding all of our teams and competitions and investing in our stakeholders. We still have a really strong community base, and at times we tend to lose sight of that, or we don't talk about that in the positive way that we should, but we've got over 150,000 participants, 475 odd clubs, and people turn out every weekend and they get a lot out of this game, and that's something that I really want us to start celebrating a bit more.
What's one area right now that you want to stick your hands into and get fit?
Well, there is no one area, right, and that's the beauty and the challenge of the role. Thankfully, we have a really clear and simple strategy as a game, and that spans all of the game. So we want to have a thriving community game. We want our teams in black to be winning. We want the business to be sustainable and growing. And really importantly, we want to have an aligned and connected stakeholder network. And one of the things that's unique about New Zealand on the world stage is that we overachieve. And that's not just in rugby, but certainly in rugby. For our population size, for our economic base, for our distance from the rest of the world, our unique proposition is our ability to work as one across the system to continue to overachieve. So that's a big opportunity for us.
Steve, did you always want this job?
It's a really hard question to answer. I wouldn't say that I've always wanted this job, and again, I've always had the mindset that whatever role I'm in, I just want to do the best job that I can. One thing I will say is, and I've been clear on this for a long time, is I care deeply about this game. It's given me a lot. I've had some incredible opportunities, and it has played a large role in shaping the person that I am today. And so every time I've been offered a new opportunity in the game, I've just wanted to grasp it with both hands, do the best that I can, and the next however many years this is for will be no different.
At what point did you realise that this might become a reality for you?
Wednesday? As I say, I was just focused week to week on doing a good job for the business, a good job for the game. And I was really surprised actually on Wednesday when the board offered me a permanent appointment into the role.
Steve, just on the costs of it there, reduced expenditure with cost of travel for all the teams that are flying overseas. I mean, do all the support staff fly business class as well, and is that something you're looking to cut back on?
Within the teams? Yeah. No, they don't. So we have different teams have different policies. We have obligations under the Players' Collective Agreement, which means that we have certain conditions that apply to players but don't necessarily apply to everyone else. So again, I won't go into the detail of the policy, but we have a very clear policy, and we're very cognizant of acting responsibly. And as you say, right now, costs of travel are going up drastically, and one of the realities of our business is that we put large groups of people on aeroplanes and send them around the world, so we're certainly feeling that pain at the moment.
Might you scale back on some of the travel for the Heart of 15, the under 85s?
We're not contemplating that at the moment. So one of the things we've been really clear on is that we don't want to make any knee-jerk reactions. We've got commitments to the game. We've got commitments to our stakeholders. We have to continue to invest in and deliver against the strategy. And that's the benefit of having a strong balance sheet, right? And one of the great things about Silver Lake's investment into our business is that we have the ability to withstand any shocks in the short term. And so for now, we're focused on acting prudently, but not kneecapping ourselves.
Steve, where do you stand on sevens? I think we can clearly see the international circuit is struggling. Half-empty stadiums. It hasn't got the vibe it used to have. Probably not producing the revenue and the commercial return it once did. Where do you stand on that cost versus benefit kind of equation? Because as you've touched on, the cost of sending a sevens team all around the world is really expensive, right?
It does cost a lot of money, but it's also a really important part of New Zealand and New Zealand rugby turning up on the world stage. The sevens teams play in different markets. They play in markets that our 15s teams don't. We're also really mindful of our obligations as a member of World Rugby, and sevens is a really important vehicle for the game globally. It provides countries that wouldn't otherwise have access to the game that access, and that's both at community level and at a high performance level, and we're cognizant that we've got a role to play in that as well. So you're right, it does cost us a lot of money, and not everything that we do generates a positive return on investment, but the key thing is that they're still investments for us.
It's not your remit, it's World Rugby's, isn't it? But does that international product need further kind of tweaking, further evaluation, further fixing, you might say?
Look, that's a question ultimately for World Rugby, and I don't want to really go into any depth on that. But World Rugby have done a lot of work on sevens. They did downsize the number of tournaments to get it to a more sustainable level, and you'd really have to ask them whether that's working or not against their objectives.
David Kirk's tenure so far as chairman has been a lot more front-facing than we've seen in the past. How is that going to affect your role as opposed to the way Mark Robinson operated in the last 5 years?
I've really enjoyed working with David. He really understands governance. He understands the game. He's got absolute credibility in the game and with our stakeholders. And equally, he's got absolute credibility in the business sector. So as a chair and as the leader of our board, he's been excellent to work with. I've really enjoyed the time that I've had working with him, and I hope that he would be saying the same things about me. So no, I have to say it's been a really positive experience working alongside David.
Does it feel like there's a bit more of a hard-nosed attitude with him as chairman?
Well, he's certainly prepared to make decisions, to be decisive. He's really clear on what the priorities for the organisation are, what the priorities for the board are. And again, I've found that really positive to work with.
And you've come from being the head of community rugby. I'm just wondering, are you going to be taking that same mindset, not to this top job about its importance
Yeah, I mean, I do think that I have the benefit of the time that I've been not just working in community rugby, but engaged in community rugby. So, you know, I've been leading the community game for New Zealand Rugby, but I've also sat for a number of years on the school rugby committee. I'm currently involved with the board of my club here in Auckland. So I understand the game, and I care deeply about the game. And you know, one of the things that actually the whole game does recognise, but we need to keep reminding ourselves, is that we are a connected system, and that the strength of the community game is where it all begins, and is the base that everything else is built on.
Steve, what do you see as New Zealand Rugby's biggest challenges heading towards 2027 and beyond?
Well, it really comes back to our strategic pillars as well, right? You know, we have, and look, call them challenges, call them opportunities. I think the fact that we are as well positioned as we are to move forward means that we can see them as opportunities, but there's no doubt that junior participation is a challenge for us. Yeah, we really need to keep working on ensuring that people understand the benefits of participating in community rugby, that playing junior rugby is actually a safe endeavour. Yeah, and there's some real misconceptions out there about the game at that level. Our teams in black continuing to win on the world stage, I mean, that never gets easier, right? And David spoke yesterday at the AGM about some of our traditional points of competitive advantage having been eroded, and that's true. So we just have to keep working harder and harder all the time to consolidate those and to perform. Generating enough revenue to fund all of that is a constant challenge as well, and then just ensuring that our system and our network are aligned and connected so that we're all leaning into these challenges together is another focus.
Are the All Blacks still the biggest brand in world rugby, or are those Springboks giving you a run?
Well, again, look, you've got to have evidence-based as opposed to opinion-based conversations here, and the evidence would say that they are. You know, we've got the largest social media following of any national union. The All Blacks are still they're the biggest draw card globally for stadiums, for broadcasters. So yeah, the evidence would say that the All Blacks are still a very big draw card.
Do you have to be conscious though that you know, as David Kirk's alluded to, doesn't get eroded?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something we think about every day. Yeah, we're under no illusion that you know, that this whole business is dependent on the All Blacks, the Black Ferns, and our other teams in black continuing to win on the world stage.
What's your stats on All Blacks eligibility, Steve?
Well, our policy and our stance on that is very clear, and it hasn't changed, and there are absolutely no plans to change that.
What's your stance on NZ Rugby?
We think it's a good idea, you know, but not all good ideas come to fruition either. So that's a live conversation for us in Rugby Australia at the moment. We're certainly not denying the fact that we're having that conversation. We talked about it with the board on Wednesday, and there's still a lot of water to flow under the bridge before that becomes a reality, but we are actively contemplating it.
When would be a sort of deadline for that decision to be made?
There's no deadline, but I mean, you know, there's certainly a strong desire on Rugby Australia's part, which we're amenable to play that next year if we are to play it. So for that to happen, we would have to make some decisions in the near future, and as I say, those conversations are live.
Have you had any feedback from Super Rugby teams regarding this, given the disruption?
Yeah, we've. And part of the process for us as we contemplate these things is we need to understand the views of all of our stakeholders, right? Not just our partner in Rugby Australia. Super clubs are open to it. The Players Association are open to it. All Blacks management are also open to it. So at the moment, we've got a willing group of stakeholders that are happy for us to continue to advance the discussions.
So Super Round would go to East?
Yeah, well, there's the date for Super Round isn't set in stone. So again, that's something we would have to work through for sure. But there's no particular weekend that must be played on.
Is Super Rugby got issues, or do you believe it's kind of what it's going through at the moment, dropping teams and so forth, just a temporary blip?
Yeah, we don't deny that there are some challenges and there are some things that we can do better around Super Rugby. But I keep coming back to having conversations around the facts, right? And we believe that we've got a really good product in Super Rugby. It's got the highest digital following of any domestic competition in the world. We know that when you look at number of tries scored, winning margins, the number of minutes of lost time due to match official intervention, all of those metrics are positive. Viewership is really strong, highlights viewership is really strong. there seems to be a lot of discussion about empty seats in stadia, and look, we don't hide from that, right? Because you can't, you see it. But that's only one metric for the competition. So yeah, we certainly acknowledge there's some work to do there, but that doesn't mean that the whole competition is in trouble.
You've got a Lions tour in 29 and a box tour in 30. We know what the sort of financial impetus and impact those events will have. Between now and then, is it a matter of kind of sustainability until the boom times?
Well, yeah, that's a really good way of framing that, because we do have to look at our business in terms of cycles rather than just year to year. We do have a business model that has peaks and troughs. In a World Cup year, we lose a significant amount of money. We have less domestic fixtures for the All Blacks and we have more costs. In a Lions year, we have bumper revenue, and so you can't make decisions based on any one of those years in isolation. You do have to look across the cycle.
From now and then, is it sustainability or is it austerity?
Sustainability, absolutely, and sustainable growth, actually, right? So definitely not austerity, and we certainly don't use that word, but one word that we do use is prudence. We need to be financially prudent.
How are you a different leader to Robert? What's different about you?
Why don't you tell me? Yeah. No, look, I mean, Robbo and I we go back a long way. We're good mates. I've really enjoyed working for Robbo over the last few years, but I'm really looking forward to bringing my own flavour to this role, and I know I have his support as well. Actually,
do you seek his advice?
We talk every now and then. As you know, he's started a new role with World Rugby, so we both acknowledge that that'll change the dynamic a little bit in terms of how we engage. But it's great knowing that he's still involved in the game.
Crusaders or Blues tonight?
Well, it's a sold-out crowd. That's all I want to say. It's going to be a great night.
When you initially missed out on that role, what was the feedback given to you at that time?
Sorry, say that again.
When you initially missed out on this role,
Yeah.
what was the feedback given to you at that time?
Yeah, look, and I actually heard David's comments on this yesterday, and he was absolutely honest in his comments, which was that at that point in time, as a new board coming in, they felt that they didn't have the competency within the business to lead the business going forward. They felt that they needed to bring someone external into the business. And since that time, their thinking has evolved. I've been fortunate that I've had the opportunity to be in this role for the last 6 months. And as I say, I've been focused on doing the best job that I can, and thankfully the board have seen that as well, and here we are.
Are you tempted to make them sit on it another 24 hours when they offered you the job?
No, I mean, one thing I will say is that I didn't have to think about it very long. It's an absolute privilege to be offered this role. It's a huge responsibility, but for now I'm really cognizant of the privilege of being offered the role, and just can't wait to get into it.
Do you see it as an opportunity to turn Plan B into Plan A?
What's Plan B?
Well, Plan B was, obviously they had other ideas, and then they've gone with you as Plan B to a degree.
I see what you mean. Yeah. Look, that's a question for the board, right? Like as I say, I'm really clear on what I bring to the role. I'm really clear on where we're going as an organisation. I'm really excited about the future. But yeah, that's a question for the board ultimately.
Steve, you're coming from community rugby, obviously, as mentioned before, and you've spoken a lot around the teams in black, but are you how are you planning on championing the community rugby now that you're officially in the top office? Yeah,
thanks. That's a really good question. First and foremost, I want us to start shaping the narrative a little bit more positively around the community game. Community rugby is the heart and soul of this country, right? Rugby is part of our national identity, and I don't think we talk about that enough. I don't think we celebrate it enough. There's a reason that Kiwis go halfway around the world and they pull on an All Blacks jersey and jump on a bar top and do a haka, right? It's because it's part of our identity, and that starts at community rugby. Rugby's good for young people, right? First and foremost, it's safe. Yes, there's risk. There's risk in any endeavour that you do, but empirically speaking, the risks of playing junior rugby are no greater than the risks of going to school. Rugby gives a lot to communities, right? At a time when our country is increasingly divided, when our demographic makeup is changing, rugby provides a great opportunity for us all to come together and grow as communities. And it's good for people's health, it's good for physical health, it's good for mental health. So I think there are a heap of really good stories that we can be telling about rugby, and I want to see us do more of that.
I guess just in the media recently there's been a bit around club rugby and sort of the premier divisions in a lot of regions. Is there any thought given to that as well?
Yeah, so, and again, look, we don't deny that there are challenges around participation, and that's not a rugby challenge, that's a sport challenge, right? So all sports are challenged in terms of people committing what's required to make the game happen, to participate in the game. And so we have to be aware of that. We need to continue to evolve our offering as a sport. I was just asked earlier, actually, what's a healthy club look like in the future? And the reality is that the picture of a healthy rugby club is shifting from something that's heaving on a Saturday night to something that's heaving on a Saturday morning. We need to ensure that junior clubs are really strong, and then that'll have a really long tail for the sport.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.